Hi guys, my name is Erica Schwartz, and today I will be presenting on features of an outstanding college essay. So a little bit about me first. I have a tutoring, college essay, and college counseling business in Lake Forest, California. I am a tutor, a test prep teacher, and a college essay guru. So I have my BA from UC Berkeley. I've been working with high school students for over 10 years and then doing college essays for about 10 years. In the past, my students have gotten into a lot of different places, notably Stanford, Caltech, Pomona, Baylor, and just this last year, one of my students got a full ride into Pepperdine, and several got into Berkeley and UCLA, and one got into Harvard. So in my spare time, I like to watch Audrey Hepburn movies and swing dance, but mostly help students find their true voice. Oops, let's go back. Okay, so first we're going to do a quick overview of the types of essays, and then we're going to get into the specific features of an essay that you'll want to make sure that you're showing in your essay. So there are a lot of things that college admission officers look at, not just essays. They also look at your grades, your class rank, the difficulty of the classes that you're taking, all your test scores, your SAT, ACT, and your SAT-2s. They look at your resume, so they look at your extracurricular activities, your community service, your work experience. They look at your letters of rec and your interview. And they also look to see, certain schools will look to see if you have a legacy at that school, or if you have any connection from your family members, if it looks like you could maybe donate to the school, if you're underrepresented minority, an athlete, if you're underrepresented in terms of your socioeconomic or geographic background, so if they don't have that many kids from your area, then that'll be more favorable, and if you have any talents. But essays are a really important part. Okay, so these are the types of essays that usually students are interested in. So most of my students are interested in the UC essays, which are, well, they like to call them short answers. But they have 4 short answers that you need to turn in, and you get to choose out of 8 different prompts. So you have 8 different prompts, you choose 4 of them, and you write 4 350-word max short answers. Then there's the common application essay, and so that's for the private schools, and that is a larger essay, so that's 650 words max. So that essay is sent to your private schools. There's also a newer kind of platform called the Coalition, which is very similar to the common application, and the word count is a little bit shorter, but the prompts are basically the same. Then a lot of the private schools will also want what's called a supplemental essay, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but they'll want shorter essays that are more specific to that school. And then as a side note, the Cal State schools don't require essays. Okay, so the common application essay. So there are 7 different prompts, and they are different prompts, but what it boils down to is, what is your story? And so with the common application essay, it's really a great section, a great way to be able to flesh out a story, because you have more space. So you can flesh out a story arc, you can flesh out a main character, and you can add in really intriguing story aspects that will really make your essay pop. With the UC short answers, there's not as much time to do that. Now you still can do that. You still are able to have a clear story, have clear characters, aka you are the main character, and have aspects, but you just can't have as many aspects. There just isn't enough time in the UC short answers to have as many story aspects as you could with a common application essay. So the supplemental essays. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of the types of supplemental application essays that you'll need to write for private schools. And a good thing to know is, usually the more competitive a school is, the more supplemental essays they'll ask for. So they might ask you for longer essays and or more essays. So for instance, a less competitive school might ask for one essay, which is a why us essay, which is why do you want to come here, whereas a harder school or a more difficult to get into school will ask for maybe 3, and maybe they'll be longer. So some examples are, a common example is a why us essay, so why do you want to come here? Another example that several schools ask for, is the roommate essay. So Stanford famously asks for this roommate essay, and a couple of other schools, they'll ask you to write an optional essay, or they'll ask you to choose your own topic, or Harvard as a choose your own topic, and you could submit possibly a roommate essay to them. Some ask you to explain an extracurricular activity. Some ask you about a time that you, let's say, encountered discrimination, and what did you do about it, or a time that you met somebody who was very different from you, how did you connect to them, that kind of a thing. And then another one is, why do you want to come here? That's another thing that they like to ask, prompt. So how do you write them? So if it's a why us essay, or a why do you want to come here, or what do you want to major in, you need to do research on that school. So you need to look up what kinds of classes you would take. You just start, this just takes time. You just have to research what you'd be interested in at that school. So what I would recommend is start with what you're interested in already at the school where you are. So what kind of extracurriculars or clubs or sports that you like to do there at your high school, and then see what do they have at the college that you're going to. So if at your high school you have, let's say, a refugee outreach, where you raise money for refugees at your high school, well, do they have that there? And if they don't have that there, would you be able to start that there? So you want to do some research and see what you would want to do at that school and what you could do at that school. If you love to do Bollywood dancing and they don't have a Bollywood dancing club at the school where you're writing to, then you could say that you would start it. You would start a Bollywood dancing club, and you would dance with the kids. You would lead you would lead your team to dance on the plaza in a performance for the whole campus. So that sounds good. Don't be predictable. Don't say predictable things that they probably hear a lot, like your school is pretty, the campus is nice, and it's very prestigious. I like the prestige, and there are a lot of majors to choose from. This is things that they commonly hear, so they don't want to really hear them again. So you want to give them some interesting aspects that shows that you did your homework and that you're thoughtful in terms of what you're writing about. So additional comments is just a place where you can put more information that would help them give you context. That's a word that I hear a lot with a lot of the admissions counselors, is give us context. So they want to put you and your life into context so that they understand sort of what circumstances you have been under, and what's happened to you, what you're interested in, etc. So here's a list of things that you want to put in, but things that stand out are if there's any serious health issues with you or your family that live with you that have impeded in your life in any way. This might be a place, even if you don't talk about it in your main essay, this would be a place where you explain further how this health issue affected your life. So also, if there's any sort of red flags in your essay, this would be a place to address them. So if it looks like your grades dropped all of a sudden, mid-high school, this would be definitely an important thing to address in your additional comments. Now, this isn't really a place to put a whole nother essay, but this is a place more to be very straightforward with your reader so that they understand, like I said, the context of you. Okay, so now let's get to important features of an essay. So who are you and what is your story? This is what they want to know with your essay, with your college essay. So why do we need a good college essay? So these are actually quotes that I heard directly from college admissions counselors. And so this is what they said. They said, if for whatever reason, if there's any negative impression, a good personal statement can overturn our initial view of the applicant. So if you do find, if there is a dip in your grades, or you just didn't do as well as you wanted to, and maybe one of your SAT or your ACT, your scores aren't as high, if there's something negative on your application, this is a place where you can talk about it and you can help them understand you and your situation. Okay, so it's just connected. Could you go to the previous slide really quick? Sure. Okay, so just going back, this is just your additional comments, but this will be up later. You'll be able to see this later once this presentation is over. This is a list of the things that should be in your additional comments. So go ahead and look through that when when our presentation is over. You can take a look through all the slides. So I'm going to go back. Okay, so why do we need a good college essay? And so this, I thought, was really, this next one was, we received thousands of applications that are very impressive in terms of statistics, but we want to see what kind of person lies behind those numbers. So who are you, right? After reading hundreds, if not thousands of essays that pretty much say the same things in the same ways, a distinctive essay is like a breath of fresh air. And so this, I have this number from how many applications UC Berkeley received last year was 79,000 applications. 79,000. And I remember the admissions counselor, we were asking, okay, well, how many do you remember out of the thousands that you read? And they said 5, right? A couple really good ones and a few really bad ones. So we want to really make sure that our essay is standing out amongst those great ones. And so this is why we need to have a great college essay. Okay, so what are our essay objectives? What's the point of writing this essay? So we want the essay to show different things about us. And so these are just some of the things that the essays could show about us. What makes us unique? What makes us interesting and quirky? Our sense of self, our reasons and our motivations, and our purpose. Something that they can't get from our application, from just reading your resume. The next part is really, really important too. Maturity. They want to see your maturity and impact. Those are the 2 words that I hear over and over again from admissions counselors: maturity, impact, and actually initiative. So that's what you want to keep in mind, is in terms of what you're showing, your maturity, your impact, and your initiative. And when you're trying to decide what to write about, if it's not something that shows that, then you might not want to write about that. And the ways that you're a leader. Now remember, there's not just one way to be a leader. There are a lot of ways to be a leader. Being a leader doesn't necessarily mean that you are the president of your club, or that you are the president of anything, really. You could be a leader amongst your peer group, or you could be a leader amongst your siblings. There are a lot of ways to take initiative and to be a leader. So keep that in mind. What we really want the admissions officer is to say, this person would be an asset to my school. I want them here. And that's our main objective, is to get admitted. Okay, so let's talk about the features of an outstanding essay, the 10 features. So I boiled it down to 10 features that outstanding essays need to have, or that an essay needs to have in order to be outstanding. So the first thing we need an opening that draws the reader in. And we want to captivate the reader's attention. Remember, they're reading your application and your essay really quickly. And so we don't have any time to lose their attention. We want to grab their attention as quick as we can, and we want to keep it all the way through. It only will take them a couple of minutes to read your essay, and so anything that draws their attention away, we don't want that. We don't want them to be thinking while they're reading your essay, what are they going to eat for lunch that day? We don't want that. We want them to keep all the way through your essay and be captivated all the way through. So here's something that can keep there are a lot of ways to create a hook. A lot of students ask me, well, how do I do this? There's no just one way people ought to do it. There are a lot of different ways to capture your reader's attention. And as you're writing your essay, you can try different hooks to see what works the best. And you can have maybe different options until you see maybe how your essay fleshes out, and then you can choose your hook. So you don't always have to just have a hook and then stay with that. You could try a hook and then maybe come up with another one later and then see what works as your essay develops. So hooks can be a lot of different things. It can be an anecdote, a description of something, a quotation. Now be careful with a quotation. You don't want to have a very general quotation maybe that they hear a lot. They hear a lot of the places you'll go. This is a quote from Dr. Seuss. Something from Gandhi. You just want to be careful if it's something that is very common, if it's not truly, truly meaningful for you, you just want to be careful about using a quote. And an interesting fact or statistics that will grab the reader. It could be an opening that surprises the reader, that tells them that tells us about a first impression that you had of something. Just you want us to care about the main character. That's what's happening. And so my favorite example to use is Toy Story. We immediately are drawn in the opening. The opening of a movie is like a hook, and so we immediately get a lot of information about the main character. So we see what's happening with Woody. We see what we need to know about him, and we like him. Right? From the get-go, we like Woody. He's a cool guy, and we understand how this story is set up, what's happening. And so we see, you know, he's the leader of the toys, and then the inciting incident happens. And so an essay can have this. We can have a quick setup where we understand a lot of what we need to know about the main character, and then we have our inciting incident. So here are a couple of examples of some openings that I really liked. So let's look at the one on the left. So an opening that surprises. So here we go. There are several responses I receive when I tell people that I'm adopted. The most common is, does it feel different? Some people offer their condolences with, I'm so sorry. Now and again they will say, wow, I don't know what I would do if my mother didn't love me and gave me away. To them I say, it doesn't feel different because I have always been adopted. You don't have to be sorry, and actually my mother does love me. So this opening is surprising because it's shocking, you know, that people would say that to somebody, especially to a young person, a child, and maybe not think anything of it. We're immediately just sort of appalled that people would say these things to her, and she immediately addresses them. So we actually see a lot about her. We see that she's very maybe strong, and we see that she's maybe kind of sassy, and you know, just doesn't bother herself with the ignorance of others. So we like her immediately, right? So we're appalled, we're drawn in, and we like her. The next one. One of my first memories is falling in love with the violin. I remember walking by a music store and was suddenly enticed by a beautiful melody. I ran inside, desperate to discover the source of these exquisite sounds, so unlike my familiar Radio Disney and Barney sing-along. I finally found the room and peered inside to see a girl playing an odd, croissant-looking instrument. She looked so poised and confident, like a queen moving a magic scepter mysteriously across strings. Her music to me was the soundtrack of pure happiness. I had to be just like her. So this is an opening that gives us an impression of something. So we see her, you know, being drawn into something. So that's an option as well. If you're writing about something that you do, an activity that you really love, you could bring us back to that moment where you really fell in love with it, and that could bring us in with you. So we are then captivated the way you are. So we want to use direct, grammatically correct, obviously, non-cliched, non-buzzword language. And the last two parts are really important. Non-cliched, non-buzzword. Definitely you want to make sure that your grammar is correct. You know, so if you need somebody to help you with the grammar, definitely get some help. But you, on your own, need to make sure that your phrases and your words are not cliche and not buzzword, which buzzword is actually like cliche. So in terms of using big, complicated SAT words, you can, but you want to sort of use them sparingly when needed, when they really help you get your point across. You don't want to just use them superfluously, like I just did now, and just throw them everywhere. We want to use them sparingly. Let me see. We want our voice to be honest and straightforward. So just speak honestly for yourself. You want to avoid using any kind of cliches. And so I have this little list of cliches. If you're not sure if something is a cliche, let's talk about what to do about that. Also, be careful of buzzwords. Use the buzzwords sparingly, so that the words that I used in a couple slides ago to describe what they want to see, maturity, they want to see impact, and they want to see initiative. You don't necessarily want to straight say those words. So those are the buzzwords. And I like to call them buzzwords because it's sort of like when someone on a game show, buzzes, and it's like, ooh, and it's like, that's how the reader might feel if you use too many buzzwords. So either don't use them at all or use them very sparingly. So here's how you fix a cliche. When you're looking at something and you have a feeling that you've heard it before, if this is something that you've heard people say, then that's probably a cliche. So what you want to do is, if you're writing and you're just kind of getting your ideas out, that's fine to write down a cliche. You just need to sort of underline it and come back to it. So when you do, you want to look at the cliche and then say, what is really honest for me to say? what is honest for what would I actually say instead of the cliche? Because the cliche is something that you've heard people say, whereas you want to say what you should say, what is honest for you to say. So just make sure you go through your cliches and you get them out of there and put what's honest for you. You want to have detailed descriptions and examples. And so you remember from the opening that we just talked about with the violin, there were a lot of details that really made the opening pop. So you want to have great details. And so every word, every sentence, every punctuation mark, just like a poem, has to have a reason for being there. So when you're editing your essay, you want to go through and break down the paragraphs, the sentences, the words, the punctuation, and make sure that it all has a reason to be there. There's a reason for the pauses. There's a reason for a long sentence and then a short sentence. It's all conveying what you want it to convey for the reader. So I like this poem here. It's very short and it gives a great detailed description. So, In a Station at the Metro by Ezra Pound. The apparition of these faces in the crowd. Petals on a wet black bough. So we immediately see what it is he's looking at. He's looking at just this blur of faces, of these light-colored faces against, the black cement, and we're there with him. We see it in our mind's eye, which is what we want to do for our reader. We want our reader to see what we're talking about in their mind's eye, along with us. So here's a great example of some description. So let's read through this. It says, when it came my turn to choreograph and direct a dance for my high school dance team, I knew that the faded leotards gathering dust in the storage room would not do. To embody the spirit of freedom and individuality intrinsic in the song I chose, I created jaunty miniskirts that flared out each time the dancer twirled. I took to my sewing machine, pressing my foot on the pedal as swiftly as a race car driver, and in no fewer than 2 weeks had finished each individual skirt and top. When I saw my dancers, each in different colored skirts, spinning like dazzling pinwheels, I knew that I loved creating beautiful, functional clothes. Several weeks later, after my dancers began wearing their skirts around school, I was inundated by girls imploring me to make outfits for them too. So we see in our mind what it was, how quickly she made these outfits and how she was inspired by them, and she just, did them as fast as she could, and then we feel, she doesn't have to say pride, but we feel the pride that that she feels when she's watching her clothes come to life on her dancers. And so we really are there with her. So you want to have detailed descriptions, but you want to also be careful with your detail and not have too much detail. So the detail all must have a point of being there. Okay, so you want to have a carefully chosen topic. So you want to people say, well, what should I write about? What ought I write about? You can write about anything. You just want to think about what your topic says to your reader. So you don't want to have anything, you don't want to write about anything that makes you seem untrustworthy or spoiled, immature, or closed-minded. So here are some examples that I would not recommend writing about. A time when you did something that was maybe troublesome. So even if something that you did wasn't necessarily illegal, if it was troublesome, then I wouldn't necessarily recommend writing about it. One time I had a student who wrote about, or who wanted to write about, making a website that would steal people's online gold from, one of those video games. And he was proud that he had made this website and he wanted to write about it. And so I definitely recommended, no, don't write about it, because even if it wasn't technically illegal, it was definitely a troublesome thing he was doing. And that's just not that's not what you want to show to your reader. You don't want to necessarily talk about going on a nice trip with your family unless you really learn something meaningful on that trip. Because if you're just writing about a trip, the message could be more, we have money and it's nice and it's, I'm privileged. And I'm privileged isn't necessarily a message that you want to convey to your reader again. Anything philosophical, very sort of broad, like life, death, is there a God, you don't necessarily want to write about. Anything controversial like gay marriage, abortion, or your stance on anything like that, that's not why I would not recommend writing about that. You want to also just be careful when you're writing to non-denominational schools about your faith. So if you practice a faith, you just want to be careful when you're talking about your faith to secular schools. And so I'm not saying don't write about it. I'm just saying, be careful when you're writing to to religiously affiliated schools, that's more when you can delve into your faith. They'll actually, a lot of times, the faith-based schools will ask you about your faith specifically in the prompts, and so that's when you can go into it. Okay, so you want to make sure, I will answer questions, but go ahead, guys, throw your questions down and I will definitely get to them at the end. Sincerity, honesty, and vulnerability. So you want to make sure that you're being sincere with the reader and honest and showing vulnerability to them so that they really see who you are and they feel close to you, because we feel close to people who are vulnerable with us. If we're talking to a friend and our friend is sad, we try to share ourselves and maybe tell our friend something that will show vulnerability for us, and then that way it invites them to be vulnerable with them. So we want to show that for our reader. We want to be vulnerable with them. So you don't want to make up a story that isn't true, or overly embellish a story that is true, but it's not exactly, it really didn't happen the way you're saying it happened in the essay. The reader can usually spot that. When I've been given essays by my students that were overly embellished, I could tell. It just sounded insincere, and we don't want that. The reader doesn't want to admit somebody who lies to them or who overly exaggerates. That's not what we want. So you want to speak honestly and show the best parts of your personality. You want them to see you as somebody who possibly does have flaws, but they love us anyway, right? You could show a flaw if you redeem it later in the essay, and we'll show, hey, I try really hard on this. I work really hard to correct this flaw, to make this flaw into a strength. We can maybe show redemption of a flaw, if we're inviting our reader into our lives and being vulnerable with them. And so I'm going to skip over this example, but you can go ahead and read this example for yourself, showing a sincerity, honesty, and vulnerability. So more what I want you to see out of this example is she's showing that she's scared in this example. This is where she's just being really honest about her fear, and that she just sort of, she's a camp counselor and she's working with kids, and she's just being really honest about her fear and just, sort of conquering it and just doing it anyways and just running out there and meeting the kids where they are and just being a really great camp counselor. And so we love her for that. When we read it, we love her for her honesty about, her fears and how she just pushed through them, because it was more important to be there for the kids, to be a great counselor, and to get the kids to love birds versus, sit in her fear. So keep that in mind when, when you're reading this. So you can go ahead and read through that a little later so I can get through more slides. So you want to have a clear structure and use interesting techniques, especially in your longer Common App essays. So these are possible essay structures that I'll go into a little bit more depth in a second. So narrative structure leads us through with a clear story, just straight through a narrative, right, with a story arc, where a montage structure uses a series of images or events to tell us a story. And then the essay techniques, which I'll talk about in a second, can really help us stand out from the hordes of other essays that the reader will be looking at. So here's the narrative structure. So the narrative structure, oops, am I here? Yes, I'm here. Wait, I'm back. Here we go. Okay, so again, Toy Story, which I love, and also Finding Nemo. These are just great, clear hero's journeys. So some of you might have already learned about the hero's journey if you've taken maybe some sort of class. Some of my kids have learned about the hero's journey. If you haven't learned about it, definitely I recommend looking it up. But here's the gist of it. So there we have a hero with a status quo. Then there's an inciting incident and a status quo change, which we talked about with Toy Story. Buzz comes. Okay, so then we have the raising of the stakes. So they run, and they have to go find Buzz, and then the claw, and all these things. And then we have the moment of truth. So we have sort of a paradigm shift moment where where our character is like, what should I do now? And we as readers, we know what they ought to do. Sort of, this is when Woody sees Buzz tied up by that mean kid Sid, and he's like, should I go save, Buzz? And then we're like, yeah, go save him. And, he's like, oh, and then he finally does it, and we're like, yay, great. And then the new status quo is, now we're both Andy's toys. So, you need to decide, how do you want to tell your story? Is it a narrative structure? Could you tell it with a status quo, inciting incident, rising of the stakes, moment of truth, and a new outcome? Or might it make more sense to do a montage structure? And really, you can do either structure with most topics. Sometimes some of my students will play around with both structures and see which one they like better if they have time before the deadline, and to see which one maybe fleshes out their subject better. And so montage structure tells a separate story using separate fragments to condense the space and time. And so you can pick a focusing lens, and that can be a lot of different things: a sports, a club, a future career, and then you just tell us these important points. You tell us about you and your life through this focusing lens. For instance, I had this one student where his focusing lens was that his father had autism, and his focusing lens was the things that he tried to do to connect with his dad that never worked, and his dad never connected with him, even though he was doing these things that his dad liked to connect with him. But then in each paragraph, he talks about how even though he did it initially for his dad, he ended up loving it for himself. And so he goes through each incident, each thing that he tried in each paragraph, and in the end he realizes, oh, I'm a person who maybe has the same interest, but I do it completely differently than my dad. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, but that could be an interesting way to talk about your topic. So techniques can really bring your essay to life. So this is a technique called an objective correlative. So an objective correlative is a set of objects or situation or chain of events, but usually a tangible object is what I like to think of, that is the formula of a particular emotion. So it is something maybe that your essay revolves around, that elicits an emotion in you and in your reader. And then again, there can be a myriad of things you could use. Try to, if you're using objective correlative, to not make it so obvious. So if you're writing about baseball, maybe not like make your objective correlative a baseball, but try something unusual that the reader would say, huh, I didn't think that would be connected to this topic, but I see how it is. Also, connecting story threads can be a really great way to tie your essay together and make it stand out. So connecting your beginning to your ending, writing the opening that will lead you to the ending, and having a great circularity of your essay can be a great technique to use. So you want to, in your essay, show your personality and your values. So there are interesting aspects of everybody's personality, and so sometimes I have students who will come to me and they'll say, I'm not interesting, I'm just not an interesting person, which never ends up being true, of course. If there are several people who are writing about the same topic, let's say Boy Scouts, each person will write about it differently because they value something different. So maybe 4 people are writing about Boy Scouts. One will write about the adventure aspect of it, one will write about the friendship aspect of it, the camaraderie, and another one will write about the leadership aspect of it. So the same topic can look differently depending on who's writing about it. So you want to imagine that your grades, your scores, and your awards, all those things, that's just sort of the bones, and the essay is the flesh. The essay is the flesh of your application, and that really brings your humanity to life. And so you just want them to say, hey, I like this guy, I like this person, I like this student, I really like them, when they read your essay. And so here's something that can help really learn about your own personality, your temperament, and your values, is to take the Myers-Briggs test. Some of you might not have heard of that before, so I would definitely recommend that you look it up. It's called Myers-Briggs test, and there are different ways you can take this test, but it's helpful in assisting people in pinpointing their specific strengths. It can really quickly get you to zone in on what it is that you're trying to show in your essay. So what are my strengths that I am bringing to the table? And so there's a test called Do What You Are, which is based on Myers-Briggs, and a lot of times it's on Naviance accounts. So I would, if you haven't taken this test, check your Naviance account and see if it's on there. If it's not, then I would talk to your school counselor and see if there's a way for you to get the Do What You Are test, Do What You Are. If there isn't, I wouldn't recommend just taking any old online test that you see for free online. I would recommend getting this book called Please Understand Me. There's 2 versions. I would recommend the second version. You can get it really cheap on Amazon, and there's a paper test inside it. I would recommend taking that paper test and then doing some reading to see what you find about the strengths that you want to show. So helpful reading, I love personalitypage.com. It's not a very pretty site, but it's a great site. It's really well written. So I recommend that you take the Myers-Briggs test either through Do What You Are or by getting the Please Understand Me book and taking that paper test, and then doing your reading on thepersonalitypage.com. So here's just a quick little chart that shows the differences between the Myers-Briggs temperament. And so people are extroverted or introverted. People are either sensing versus abstract. That's what intuition stands for, is being abstract. People are thinking versus feeling. And then they're either, the last two are judgment versus perceiving. But what that really means is, do you want your options closed? Do you like it when decisions are made? That's the judging. Or do you like it when your options are open? Do you like having lots of options, and you like keeping your options open as long as possible? And so these are the differences. So there are 4 different categories, 2 possibilities for each category, and so in total 16 different types. And remember, because everybody's different, 2 people of the same type will be different people. I mean, you're not exactly the same as somebody who is your exact same type, but what you'll see is that people who are the same type have very similar values and sort of ways of seeing the world. So this can help you quickly, like I said, just pinpoint what it is you want to talk about with your essay. So here are the 4 main categories of Myers-Briggs temperaments. We have NFs, NTs, SJs, and SPs, so the 4 main categories. So when you take your test, I would go back and look at this and really think about, okay, well, what are my main values that I want to make sure that I am showing in my essay? And so NF values, they value benevolence, enthusiasm, empathy. NT values ingenuousness, efficiency, and effectiveness. SJ values hard work, authority, and responsibility, so respecting authority and taking care of responsibility. SPs value excitement, spontaneity, and being in the moment. And so when you're thinking about, what it is that you want to say, think about sort of your temperament's main values and how you can be expressing those to our reader. All of those are fantastic values to have. And what do they mean to you? And that's what you want to show. You want to create a sense of anticipation. So I like this quote, drama is anticipation mingled with uncertainty. So we want to create a great story, and the way we do that is we have a likable character, who's us, who goes on a journey where they're tried, and we learn something, we make a difference for the better. We make a change for the better. And so you want to, when you're going through your essay and editing, ask yourself, am I creating anticipation? Have you made the reader wonder what will happen next? So if you immediately give away the ending in the beginning, we're not really anticipating what's going to happen next. If we just said in the beginning of Toy Story, as soon as Buzz Lightyear appears, if we said, oh, well, it's going to be okay, the end will both be Andy's toys, and we were like, well, I don't want to watch the rest of this movie. But we're not sure what's going to happen. So you want to make sure, you want to edit your essay to make sure that you're not just giving away the ending right at the beginning. You want to, if you see that you're giving away the ending in the beginning, you want to take that out and make sure that that's left to the end. You want the reader to be clear as to what's happening. You don't want them to be confused about anything, but you want to make sure that they're not just, oh, okay, well, this is what's going to happen. Make sure that you're clear enough, because sometimes when students will read their own essays, they already know their story in their mind, or if they'll have like their mom read it or something like that. Your family and you will know your story, but when you're editing your essay, you have to pretend that you don't know you at all. So you want to pretend that you don't know what's happening, or you're not sure of the situation. So you want to look at it with new eyes when every time you sit down and edit, pretend that you don't know what's happening. And what would you question if this was just this brand new reader reading this essay? What would you look at and question? Okay, there isn't anybody you couldn't love once you heard their story. I like that quote too. And so I'm trying to get the reader to love us. So we want to leave the reader with a strong ending. So don't ever say, in conclusion. We know that we're at the conclusion because we're at the end of the essay. We want to sort of have the reader be immersed in our story, and then, we want to take them through this journey with us, and then when they're done, we want them to sort of like wake up. Like you would with a really great movie. You would just sort of wake up when it's over and the lights come on and you're like, oh, it's over. Oh, wow, oh my gosh, like I've just been on this roller coaster ride. And we can take somebody through a roller coaster ride in 3 minutes. If we write a great essay. And so here's this example straight from, this is the end of the essay, the same essay of the violin girl. So here's what she says in the ending. Many years after I first ran into that music shop, I was practicing for an advanced certificate of merit in a practice room of my own. Mozart's Sonata in E minor was my only thought as I frowned at my music, determined to perfect my performance. I was engrossed in sawing away when something small caught my eye. I looked out the window of my practice room and saw a little girl watching me with a face of adoration and curiosity. I hope that another little girl started her own journey that day. My dream career in chemical engineering may be miles away from my first practice room, but the violin isn't just something that I learned how to play over the years. Music has become my friend and mentor in a journey of sacrifice, discipline, and compassion. So she did use a little bit of the buzzwords, but we really see a great tying in together of the beginning from that opening that we read a couple slides ago to this ending. There's a great circularity of, you know, somebody gives the gift to her, she gives the gift to someone else. It's just really nice. If you read the rest of the essay, if you've read, you know, if you could read the rest of the essay, you know, she just takes us through this journey and we're woken up like, oh, wow, that's great. And we feel great. We leave the reader with a great ending. So we want an essay that shows that we care. So you don't want to repeat anything in the resume portion of your application. You don't need to say what your GPA is or what your scores are, that you won this award necessarily, unless this is a really, you know, prestigious award that you want to explain in your essay, but give us a different aspect of it then. If you're saying something that's already in your application, give us a different aspect of it, or don't say it at all. So is it clear that we've carefully considered all the choices that we've made within our essay? And is it clear, does it look like to the reader that we've made a lot of revisions, that there's pages and pages of revisions that we've made? What I like to tell my students is, if you're doing this right, this should be the hardest thing you've ever written. These essays are very, very arduous to write, but they're also the most exciting thing a lot of my students have ever written. And it's a really exciting process to think about what motivates you, you know, what your purpose is, what excites you, what you love, what you value. That can be a really great and exciting process, but also really difficult. So just be ready for that when you're writing your essays, that this is a very long process. I like these two quotes on the right side here where it says, your eloquence should be the servants of the ideas in your head. Your rule might be this: if a sentence, no matter how excellent, does not illuminate your subject in some new useful way, then scratch it out. It's got to go. And this is really one of the #1 things you have to remember when you're editing. If it's not doing what you need it to do, it needs to go. I think Chekhov once said, kill your darlings. And that's what I say to my students. Even if there's just a sentence that you just really love, you don't necessarily have to delete it forever. You could just, I have a little section at the end of each draft where it says taken out, and we just paste things that are just, you know, had to get rid of. But it needs to have a purpose there, and if it doesn't, it has to go. And then I like this little Hemingway. He's pretty sassy with an interviewer. He just said, you know, how many times I rewrote the last part of Farewell to Arms 39 times, and they were like, well, why did you do that? What was the problem? And he's like, I had to get it right. So you have to do it a lot to get it right. Okay, so we have this essay Q&A, so I'll go back to this in a second. I'll leave this little page up so that if you have any of these questions, then, you know, please feel free to ask them on the bottom. And then this is my information, so this is my name, my website. If anybody needs any help or, you know, any questions, concerns, or requests, I do one-on-one sessions with people on Skype and in person, so please let me know if anything is needed, if you had any questions or concerns or requests. So I'm going to go back to this essay Q&A, and then I'm going to start reading the questions that I have here on the bottom. So somebody says, if you're talking about the impact of someone else on you, how would you describe that in descriptive terms that you just talked about? So that's a good question. If you're describing someone else's impact on you, how would you describe that in descriptive terms? So you want to be careful when you're talking about other people is the thing. So some people will write an essay maybe about their grandmother. For instance, I wrote my initial essay about my grandmother. She had Alzheimer's disease, and I spent a lot of time with her in high school, so I wrote my initial essay about that. But the problem is, she wasn't the one going to college. I was. So you want to have all the descriptions. You want to, you know, write your initial draft, but then make sure that you're discussing someone's impact on you in terms of you, and it's not necessarily all about them, or even mostly about them. If you're talking about somebody else's impact on you, what I would recommend is really then focusing after their impact on you, your impact then on others, or sort of how they influence you to influence others. I hope that makes sense. So that's how sort of it can be less about just this other person and more about you and your impact. So it's hard to necessarily answer that straightforward, but be descriptive in a way that's necessary to get the point of you across, of what you value and what you bring to the table. Okay? So if you have more questions about that, this person, please put that on later on. Do you offer fashion design program? I don't offer. I'm not sure what that question means, but maybe if you're asking about maybe like an artist statement, some art schools will want an artist statement to get into their school. So I've had students who got into ballet programs or art programs, and so you had to write an artist's intent. So that one, you want to still have a similar thing. You can still have a story arc where, like, this is how I got into this thing, this is what I love about it, this is the struggles I've had with it, but you want to be a little bit more descriptive in terms of, like, you want to be a little bit more technical with the reader, because your audience is the people at the art school, right? So not just necessarily the regular admissions officers. So you can be a little bit more technical, a little bit more, this is the studio I studied under with this person and the impact they had on me, more than you would in a regular Common App essay, if that's what you're asking. Oh, you're welcome so much. No problem. Okay, thank you. You answered my question perfectly. Okay, so if anybody has more questions, please put them on the bottom. I'm going to skim through my essay Q&A and see if there's anything else that I want to add, and then I'll just check into the questions later when I'm done. So let me see. See if I missed anything in this essay Q&A. How do I figure out what to write about? And so I do get that question a lot. How do I figure out what to write about? What I would recommend is looking at your resume, just your regular resume, and really asking yourself, what means the most to me? If I had to quit all of these things and I just had to stay with one thing, if I had to quit all my clubs, if I said you couldn't do anything else except this one activity, what would you do? And that can sometimes help somebody decide what it is that they would write about, because if they could only have time, if they only had time in the day for one thing, what would be that thing that they would do? So that's one way to go about figuring out what you want to write about, what's the most meaningful to you, even if it's not necessarily where you spend the most time. If it's the most meaningful to you, then I would recommend that. I would also recommend, if there's a situation or a challenge that's happened that's really affected your life more than other situations or challenges, then I would definitely recommend writing about that. So if there's a challenge that's really shaped your life in a very significant way, I would definitely recommend writing about that. A lot of people, or not a lot of people, but sometimes I have students that will get nervous about writing about a challenge. They'll say something like, I don't want people to feel sorry for me, I don't want any pity. There is a way to write about a challenge so as not to do that. And the way I like to tell my students is, when you're writing about a challenge, you are the hero of the story, because you're here right now. No matter what you've been through or suffered through, you are here today writing this essay. So you are the hero. You've persevered and you've learned and you've survived. And so as long as you show the reader that, no matter what challenge you're writing about, they won't just feel sorry for you. They'll feel empowered by you and they'll feel inspired by you. And so that's kind of the mindset you want to think about if you're writing about a challenge. Any tips for how to start the essay? Sometimes I recommend, if somebody can't think of a hook, to just start writing. Just skip the hook and come back to it. But just really start writing the body of the essay to see what comes out, and the hook will sometimes come to you. Somebody asked, how do you know when your essay is too informative, such as too much detail? You will know, I think, if you try to read it with new eyes. So I would definitely not read it tired or read it in the middle of the night. I would read it with new eyes at a moment when on a Saturday or something, when you're not stressed out, and pretend that you really are a brand new person. And then just ask yourself, is this essay telling me something new outside of the resume, outside of the application? Am I really getting what's important to this person? Do I really understand what motivates them and what they love and what they value? Do I understand their humanity? And if that's not the case, then you probably need to take out some of the description and put more of the story or more clarity in that, if it's too informative. Sometimes people who are more thought-oriented people can maybe write in a way that can be maybe a little bit stiff. You want to ask yourself, you know, am I really showing the deep, vulnerable parts of me, you know, or am I coming off maybe as a little bit too informative, or, you know, holding the reader at arm's length? We want to bring our readers in and really show them these deeper parts of us. Even if we don't necessarily show other people in real life these parts of us, we want to dig deep and do this for our reader so that they can see this. So let me look. How do I brag in a way that doesn't sound like I'm bragging? So I like to call these quiet brags. So there are ways to brag and show that, you know, you are a great and cool person, which you are, and do it in a quiet way that isn't overt. So I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but you want to read through your essay and you want to see if what you understand, you know, with new eyes, and see if you can find these little quiet brags that show, you know, how innovative you are, or your problem-solving abilities, or just how you were able to do this really interesting, cool thing that's kind of, you know, not as blatant to the reader. How do I make my essay deep? That's good. That's a good question. Just be vulnerable to your reader. Be honest. Take us through a story arc. That's important. If it's important to you, it'll be important to our reader too. And so that's what sometimes students struggle with, is they'll say, it's just, nobody will like this thing that I like. But you would be surprised at some of the things, you know, my students have written about. They've written about World of Warcraft and how that's influenced them in their decision to be a civil or an engineer, right, or a computer science major. And you know, there's just a lot of things that you can write about, and as long as you show the reader why it's important to you, then they'll understand as well. How do I know my essay is good versus it's okay? I would say probably, like I said, looking at it with new eyes and maybe reading it to somebody who has enough expertise to know how to be objective and listen to if you're showing all those aspects, those features that we talked about of an outstanding essay. Should I share my essay, and with how many people? So that's something you want to be careful of. Sometimes parents can get a little too overbearing in terms of what they want their student to write about, and it's not necessarily maybe something that the student wants to write about. Sometimes people will have, you know, lots of different people read their essays, you know, their neighbor who went to Harvard, and their sister, and their best friend, and their English teacher, and all these different people, and they all have these different kinds of opinions. So you just want to be, I'm not saying don't have people read it, I'm just saying be careful with having what they call, not to be cliche, but too many cooks in the kitchen. A lot of different people who have a lot of different types of expertise might give you a lot of different advice and confuse and upset you. So I would just seek out professional advice when you have questions about your essay, and just be careful about who you're asking. And then we already answered the last one about how do I want, if I don't want them to feel sorry for me, is to show yourself as, you know, the hero of this story. So that about wraps it up, guys. If you have, like I said, any more questions, please send me an email and contact me and let me know. And I hope you liked this presentation. It was great talking to you, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.